They were driven, flushed out of their homelands. Some were losers in war. Some were victims of famine or injustice, or both. For whatever reason, now they were fleeing their island home. Now they were exiles. In the silence of sacred groves, living trees were felled for the hulls of their canoes. These were the people of the canoes, and they regarded a canoe as a living thing. Sails were fashioned from strips of pandanus leaves, ropes of coconut husks were the lashings. Storage gourds of fresh water were oiled against salt air, and cuttings of yam, cane, taro, breadfruit, and banana were sealed from the ravages of seawater. Now, they must find a new home in the unknown. Some 1,300 years ago, refugees like these from Polynesian islands spread piecemeal over the South Pacific, without compass, without charts, began sailing northward. One can only guess at how many canoes were swallowed up, squalls, tempests. But those who survived discovered a chain of uninhabited islands that since have been named everything from the Sandwich Islands to Little Java. We know this island chain today as simply Hawaii. Paradise, a much overused description of the Hawaiian Islands. But for those early exiles who built a new life here, that's what it was. A pristine but practical paradise. Rich lava soil, abundant rainfall, ideal climate, disease-free, virtually pest-free, and exuding a kind of magic that they called mana, the essence of all creation, a circuit to the source, a bristling of divine energy. That magic still permeates Hawaii, though those early Polynesian pioneers might not recognize it as mana. energetic drive to build, to create, to live life to the fullest still crackles. As this island chain grew, literally increasing in size by buildups of lava from volcanic eruptions, there grew a human history, an intensely human story chanted by kahunas and recorded on stone by the ancients. A story reflected in the forest ponds in Maui and from glass and steel high-rises in Oahu. On the Big Island, Hawaii, a story prefaced in a valley of volcanic desolation, footnoted in the rock strata of Kauai's Waimea Canyon, punctuated by the sheer cliffs of Molokai, and underscored by catamarans, cruise ships, airships, and gracefully retold in the gestures of the hula. This, then, is that story. Our story's beginning takes us southward, downward, deep down, far south of the equator. In ocean covering half the Earth's surface is a far-flung scattering of islands, the underbelly of Polynesia. They were settled by a Stone Age people from Asia who built great canoes, double-hulled seaworthies up to 80 feet in length that held 20 to 40 people. These migrating Polynesians were skilled and daring navigators. In waves, they set on long, incredibly dangerous migration voyages to other shores. Size was important to them. Only the biggest and strongest could man a canoe. As odd as it may seem to us, in an age obsessed with weight loss, body fat was prized. In a voyage of thousands of miles in an open canoe on the open sea, body fat is protection from the numbing winds and a reserve to draw upon when food runs out. When the pharaohs were building their pyramids, these driven voyagers began reaching their other shores. First the Marianas, then New Caledonia. Now the other shore was Tonga, where their culture flourished. From Tonga, they rooted in Samoa, and then Tahiti. 200 years before Christ, the Marquesas became that other shore. To the southwest, they became the Maori of New Zealand. To the southeast, the magical other shore was Easter Island. Lastly, they found that other shore in the islands of Hawaii, completing what is called the Polynesian Triangle of Discovery. Historically, there were many waves of migration to the Hawaiian Islands. The first, more than 1,000 years ago, from the Marquesas. Then it is believed, about 500 years later, immigrants from the island of Tahiti. For those refugees of some 1,000 years ago, sailing into the unknown, what was it like? Men, women, with their pigs and dogs and chickens, and their shrinking supplies of food and water. Birds were their compass. They followed north-flying birds, birds that they knew could not land on water, sailing from sea to sea in an unimaginable vastness of ocean. They followed in blind faith that in the north, unknown and unexplored, there would be a green atoll those birds would light upon. It was their only hope for survival. The night sky arched over an empty, death-like maw. But as they left the reaches of the South Pacific behind, a star appeared, fixed and bright. Now the North Star became their compass. More days, weeks, months of bucking winds and currents. Whales were among the few signs of life. It was more than a place of refuge they were seeking. It was the other shore, a state of being, of life renewed that humans have always sought. So they followed their star. Then they sighted it. A massive cloud rising, a cloud the prevailing winds cannot bend or move. The cries of seabirds. Now they saw that great cloud rising from a mountain spewing fire. Their canoes creaking, their bodies starved and lashed raw by salty winds, they arrived at a southern shore of the big island of Hawaii, their other shore. 2,000 miles from North America and 2,000 miles from the nearest neighboring islands, the Hawaiian is the most isolated archipelago on Earth. It was AD 750 when the first Polynesian voyagers had reached the Hawaiian chain. They found the islands a paradise. Flowers, ferns, foliage found nowhere else on Earth. The sacred ohia, exotic birds, the apapane, reefs abounding in fish, and a blessed absence of reptiles, flies, fleas, lice, and gnats. It appears that Kauai was the first island to be settled, and that these first settlers were commoners, men and women of low status, the dispensable kind often chosen as human sacrifices for the gods. Legend has it that the Polynesians who first settled in Kauai were elves, Hawaiian leprechauns. Here they're called menehune. The menehune were workaholics. They built this fish pond at Alikoko. Hawaiian fish ponds were fenced in underwater. Fish swam in through openings, lured by the algae that was cultivated for them. After feasting, they were too fat to swim out through the same openings. Now it was the Hawaiians' turn to feast. Menehune get credit for building this ditch carrying water to irrigate fields for growing taro. It has stonework unlike any other found on the islands. Some believe the Menehune could build a ditch like this in a single night. Elves or not, that first wave of settlers brought people of courage and accomplishment. The second wave of Polynesians to make it to these islands began arriving some 500 years ago. Their point of embarkation was Tahiti, 2,100 miles away. They too, following their guidebird and their star, to the other shore. It was these Tahitian emigres who gave these islands their name, Hawaiki, Hawaii. Not only did the refugees from Tahiti carry with them their pigs and chickens, their taro and breadfruit, they brought their gods. From Tahiti comes womanly Pele. From the holy island of Bora Bora, from the rising mists of the lagoons, and from the red clouds over Tahiti. She is the Pele Honamea, goddess of the sacred land. She eats the land with her flames. On each of the Hawaiian Islands, Pele has left her mark. She came first to the islands of Niihau and Kauai. We know now that these are the oldest islands in the 8 islands that make up the state of Hawaii. Kauai is unique. The interior opens to a canyon resembling that great wonder, the Grand Canyon. Then the fiery Pele found a home on a younger island, Oahu. Diamond Head on that island is the collapsed crater of an extinct volcano. Now she breathed her fire on a newer island still, Maui. There she dwelled in sacred Haleakala, this volcano sleeping but not dead. After a vicious fight with her sister, the goddess of the sea, she crossed to the newest of all the islands, Hawaii. Where she dwells, eyes glowing to this day, spewing fire and molten lava with alarming frequency. Without Pele's volcanism, these islands wouldn't exist. With them, they brought their sacred genealogies, preserved in ancient chant, committed to memory. There were nobles among them, chiefs or the children of chiefs, whose bloodlines went back to the gods. Magic, mana, that godly energy, they were wired with it. Through their sacred genealogies, they reinstituted the feudalism of the islands they'd left behind. Class distinction, the commoner and the noble, the ali'i. And to enforce this social order, the rigid system of kapu, taboo. This is the warning sign, forbidden on pain of death, kapu. Even in today's Hawaii, posted warnings read, kapu. Whatever a member of the chiefly caste, the ali'i, touched became sacred. For a commoner to touch it was kapu. An ali'i's shadow could not be touched, kapu. For men and women to share food together was kapu. Food was prepared and served by men. Even the highest-born women were forbidden to eat with men. For a woman to eat coconuts was kapu. For women, pork was kapu. Bananas were kapu. Shark meat was kapu. It was the kapu system that kept the ruling class in power. But the kapus pertaining to natural resources make sense to us. There were plants that could not be cut or fish caught at certain times of the year. Conservation, much like today's fishing regulations. To break a kapu was to invite the wrath of the gods, famines, earthquakes. No matter which of the numerous kapus was broken, the penalty was death. But for the kapu breaker, there was an out. If he or she could run fast enough to come here. Kapu breakers were pursued by those who would put them to death. But a kahuna, a priest of the gods, could rescue them if they succeeded in reaching sanctuary, the pu'u honua, ohu naunau. the most sacred place of refuge in the islands. It exuded mana of such power that if a kapu breaker could reach these confines, the curse that hung over him would be lifted. The refuge is enclosed by an L-shaped wall 1,000 feet long, built in the 16th century without mortar. Masons carefully fitted each stone to the other. A mausoleum held the bones of many high chiefs. Hence the mana. Today, Pu'uhonua, Ohunaunau, is a place of refuge for tourists. Kahunas were channels to the gods, priests, physicians, necromancers, and keepers of the temple. The heiau, the kahuna nui, or high priest, was almost as powerful as a high chief. This is the great heiau, built by Kamehameha the First. Pu'ukohola, the Hill of the Whale, a huge structure of thatch over stone platforms. A lele, an offering stand. Here gifts to the gods were placed heavenward from the height of this oracle tower. Lananu'u Mau Mau. It was believed that a kahuna could see into the future. Even today, such temples are kapu. A heiau was consecrated to the gods by human sacrifice. In the meantime, common folk made the most of what the islands had to offer. Wood and thatch were used for building houses. The craft of canoe building was kept up. Indeed, Hawaiians built some of the finest canoes in all of Polynesia. Breadfruit was cultivated, and taro for the root, which was pounded into a paste that is the Hawaiian staff of life, poi. Though livestock was bred for meat, the sea offered protein in abundance. Fish hooks were fashioned, and fish nets. Crabs were caught with long poles. Along rocky shores there were octopus. Leaves of the tea plant were dried and used for sandal making. A gourd became a calabash. Mats were woven of pandanus leaves. Bark from the wauke tree was beaten to form tapa cloth. Dyes for the cloth came from the noni plant. Times of plenty allowed them the leisure to create works of beauty, of art. Most treasured were feather capes made for the ali'i. High chiefs and kings wore them with pride. Feathers were gathered from 4 kinds of birds. Only the red or yellow feathers were plucked. Then the bird was set free. A cape of length could take a generation to complete. Helmets worn by kings and warriors were also things of beauty. They were called mahi ole. Some were curved to look like a rainbow, a sacred symbol. Though theirs was a Stone Age culture, the Hawaiians reached a level of refinement and sophistication unrivaled in Polynesia. And so, the average Hawaiian worked and played. They even played a board game called konani. We'd call it checkers. They worked and played and danced to the rhythms of their labors.
Oh,
Perhaps it wasn't really paradise, but considering the state of the more civilized world at the time, it came pretty close. For centuries, Hawaiians were simply unaware of a world outside their islands. But during those centuries, voyagers in Europe were following their stars, seeking their other shore. Columbus, who made the first voyage to the Americas. Prince Henry, the navigator. Magellan, first to sail around the world. Now the star burned brightest for Captain Cook of the British Royal Navy. His other shore was the Pacific. Then the Pacific was a blank map, an ocean of such size that whole groups of islands might be found and lost again for decades at a time. In his explorations, he encountered the glaciers of New Zealand and the Polynesian Maori, whom he found unfriendly. Farther south still, he skirted Antarctica. As fine a cartographer as he was a navigator, Cook began filling in the blanks on the map of Polynesia. While in Tahiti, which he called the Society Islands, he picked up the Polynesian language. Then, on a January morning in 1778, Cook's vessels were approaching the leeward coast of the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Chiefs and commoners were baffled by the sight. To them, the two ships looked like trees moving on the sea. Some were terrified. On that January morning, Hawaiians were discovering that there was a whole new world beyond their shores. And Captain Cook was discovering the Hawaiian Islands. Things would never be the same. Though his discovery was unintentional, Cook christened the islands after the Earl of Sandwich, First Lord of the British Admiralty. Historians would have to wait nearly a half a century for the invention of photography, so explorers of the day brought artists along to record places and events. Cook's was named John Webber. His legacy is a priceless record of Hawaiian life 2 centuries ago. After sailing away for many months, he returned to winter in what were now called the Sandwich Islands. In January of 1779, he took anchorage at Kealakekua Bay off the Big Island of Hawaii. This bay was sacred to Lono, a hero god who had left for a distant land but promised to return. Cook was soon aware that he had arrived just at the time of Makihiki, the feast of Lono. To the Hawaiians, the ship's mast resembled Lono's image. Surely this must be the god. Hawaiians came out en masse, and Captain Cook was escorted to the island as a god. Cook was intrigued by the Hawaiians, but he set hard and fast rules against fraternization. His crew hungered for women. As captain, he forbade any such contact. Some of the men carried disease. The sailors' restrained resistance to them made the Hawaiian women only more seductive. Cook's prohibition became impossible to enforce. After 2 weeks of hospitality, Cook and his party sailed out of the bay. A storm arose, a gale. One of Cook's ships was damaged, so the party limped back to Kealakekua Bay. Now Cook was no longer treated as a divine being. An ugly incident occurred, leading to a fracas. Then warriors attacked the foreigners, killing 50-year-old Cook and 4 Marines. Dutifully, John Webber, the artist, recorded the incident. The death of Captain Cook. Nearly 100 years later, some of Cook's countrymen raised this monument to him, near the place of his death. James Cook turned out not to be a god, but he was among the greatest of navigators and a forerunner of today's anthropologist, recording information and collecting artifacts from the lands that he explored. As for the Hawaiians, paradise would be no more. They had dwelled long in their own cosmos. They had lived with plenty. They were virtually without disease. Now, with Cook's discovery, they braced themselves against more encroachment by outsiders. Already, Cook's sailors had left a legacy, albeit against their captain's effort to curb them. Venereal disease, more diseases would follow. Captain Cook's discovery marks the beginning of the end of the Hawaiian people. A patchwork. That is what these overlooked islands had become. A patchwork of petty kingdoms, scattered, fragmented, vying with each other jealously. And now they were open to invasion. The British would come again to these Sandwich Islands, and the French, and Americans, and Russians. It seemed impossible for these islands to unite and resist their coming. Then, sometime near the end of the 1750s, on a night filled with portents for the future, a son was born to a Kohala chief and the daughter of a chief from Kona. His place of birth was here, in Kohala, on the Big Island of Hawaii. He was given the name Paea. There were kings and chiefs threatened by his birth, who might have slain the newborn. So the infant Paea was parted from his mother and whisked to this valley, Waipio, where he lived in hiding, among the waterfalls and the black sand beaches, for the first 5 years of his life. Thus the child Paea was given the new name, Kamehameha, meaning the lonely one. When he was 14, he was sent to Kau, on the slopes of the volcano Mauna Loa. Here he was trained in the ways of the stars and planets, navigation, rituals pleasing to the gods, and the arts of war. He learned to wield war clubs, serrated with the teeth of sharks, javelins 18 feet long. He gave himself wholeheartedly to the fierce war god Ku. Young Kamehameha had boarded Cook's vessel when the captain was mistaken for a god. Kamehameha strove to acquire Cook's mana, a ship like his, guns, cannon, and white men to teach Hawaiians how to use them. As his Stone Age culture joined in a race for iron weapons, Kamehameha set sights on his other shore. He was determined to unite all of the petty kingdoms and chieftains of the 8 islands into one kingdom. To this end, he invaded Maui, driving the island's defenders into the narrow Io Valley, where they were cornered, slaughtered. At the same time, on the Big Island, a rival king ravaged Kamehameha's territory. Kamehameha sped back to Hawaii to defend his taro patches and fish ponds. The rival king, in hurriedly herding his forces back to his territory, edged the volcanic crater Kilauea. This was the goddess Pele's territory. Fire, ash, rained upon the forward column. When those of the rear column caught up, they beheld men and women like so much hewn clay, baked into postures of death in Pele's kiln. Their footprints still scar the Kau Desert. Kamehameha was convinced that the gods were working in his favor. In 1791, all of the Big Island of Hawaii came under his undisputed rule. But other shores lay beyond, With cannon, a huge fleet of canoes, and 16,000 men, he again attacked and ravaged Maui. Then he swept over Molokai. He thundered onto Oahu, striking down chiefs and warriors. The routed defenders fled to the heights of the Nuuanu Pali. Here they were trapped against sheer cliff. In the dense fog, they jumped, leaped, or were pushed to their deaths 1,000 feet below. Now, without going to war, Kauai and Niihau fell into his regal grip. Fallen kings and chiefs were dutifully sacrificed to the war god, and the lonely one became Kamehameha I, unifier and king of the 8 Hawaiian Islands. His was one of the great achievements of Hawaiian history. He made Honolulu on the island of Oahu his capital. After establishing a special relationship with Great Britain, he incorporated the Union Jack in the flag of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Fiercely, he had given himself to the arts of war. Now, with like fervor, he gave himself to the arts of peace and government. But he held fast to the kapu system, the old taboos, the only law his people knew. Kamehameha died in 1819 at the age of 70. As his subjects chanted in mourning, his bones were buried in a secret place. They say the morning star alone knows where Kamehameha's bones still lie. The kingdom was enjoying years of peace. Kamehameha's son and heir was Liholiho, whose mother was the highest-ranking chiefess on the islands. The kingdom was yielding more and more to foreigners when Liholiho became King Kamehameha II at age 22. Bearing the Kamehameha name is as close as he came to resembling his father. Liholiho was an alcoholic. Queen Ka'ahumaru, the old king's favorite of his 21 wives, was the power behind the throne. Were she alive today, she'd be a feminist. But this proud, forceful woman, longing for freedom of movement, was so high-born that she was a prisoner of her own sacred mana. The only way for her to break out was to end the kapu system. So she prevailed upon Liholiho to violate that most stringent of kapus, segregation of men and women while eating. The moment struck at a banquet, British style, given by the king. In accordance with the kapus, men were seated at one table, women at another. A place at the women's table was unoccupied. Fortified with rum, the king took leave of the men's table, presented himself at the women's table, and began eating. Ravenously. With this one royal act, the kapu system was broken. By royal command, the gods were abolished, their temples set aflame. Liholiho had not only broken the kapu system, he had rid Queen Ka'ahumaru of all that constrained her. This act, however, left the Hawaiian kingdom without a religion. From raw-boned New England, they were on their way. On 23 October 1819, 14 missionaries, 2 ordained ministers among them, and a physician, set sail for the Hawaiian kingdom, their other shore, where they were prepared to do battle with the forces of heathenism. The voyage was retching and lasted 6 months. They arrived just 2 centuries after their pilgrim forebears first set foot on Plymouth Rock, and just in time to learn of the destruction of the old gods. This they took as a sign. Liholiho granted them permission to stay in his kingdom for 1 year, on a trial basis. The New Englanders were appalled by the shamelessness, the sensuality of the Hawaiians. Hawaiians had no sense of sin. Indeed, the Hawaiian language was without a word for religion. For their part, Hawaiians called the missionaries long necks for their high, tight collars. Armored with faith and layers of scratchy woolens, the missionaries set out to fit the Hawaiian lifestyle with a New England conscience. They built tidy houses, adapted the island's food to their palates, spun their own cloth, and made properly modest clothes. They learned the Hawaiian language and committed it to a written form so that the Hawaiian people could learn to read and write their own tongue. Now there were books to be printed. Tirelessly, they established schools. Just a little over a decade after the arrival of the first missionaries, some 5,200 people had been enrolled. Because of the missionaries, by the year 1840, Hawaii was the most literate nation in the world. Most importantly, the missionary presence helped keep these islands free from being gobbled up by predator nations. There were high chiefs won over to the church, some from a simple fear of hellfire. Then, 6 years after the missionaries' arrival, old Kamehameha's favorite wife and the regent of the realm, Kamehameha, accepted Christianity. Others of royal blood would follow. When she was 64, Kamehameha retired to a small thatched hut to die, a royal Hawaiian and a Christian. She had become a bridge between ancient Hawaii and the 19th century. Missionaries weren't the only New Englanders who eyed Hawaii as their other shore. As early as 1819, 2 ships from New Bedford anchored at these islands. Whalers. Offshore, they took a whale that yielded 100 barrels of oil, a bonanza. At the time, it was whale oil that fueled the lamps of New England. More ships followed. By 1822, 60 whaling ships had called at the islands. By day, their crews preyed upon whales. By night, they preyed upon women. This is Lahaina, which had been a wide-open port on the island of Maui. These streets once swarmed with whalers, once rang with drunken brawls. Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, jumped ship to spend a couple of nights in Lahaina. Seagoing foreigners were a weak warning of the real danger. Hawaii's independence was threatened. These Midway Islands lay in the path of a historical juggernaut: expansionism. France, the United States. Indeed, for about 5 months in 1843, these islands were ceded to Great Britain. Holding the kingdom together was now the task of Kamehameha III, second son of Kamehameha the Great. He had aggressive foreign governments to deal with, so his government was made up of able foreigners, loyal to the crown, many of them Yankees from the U.S. Granting powers to these foreigners put his people on edge. Even lesser jobs, like harbor master and constable, were filled by naturalized foreigners. During his reign, Kamehameha III enacted the Great Mahele, the 3-way partitioning of the island's lands to the crown, the chiefs, and the common folk who worked those lands, if just claims were presented. In reality, this well-meant land reform reduced land-working Hawaiians to serfdom. Their very language was without words for private property. How is it possible to own the land, they'd ask? Some chiefs sold their shares of land to foreign speculators for the cultivation of sugarcane. With the sugar industry burgeoning, Hawaii was fast becoming a foreign-controlled one-crop economy. Kamehameha III died in 1854 amid the flurry of an annexation movement of Hawaii by the United States. There were to be no more annexation rumors. In Kaia'o Church, known as the Westminster Abbey of Hawaii, a new king was crowned, Kamehameha IV, and he pledged himself to keep Hawaii independent. In the same historic church, the new king married his childhood sweetheart, Emma Naea Rook, a great-grandniece of Kamehameha the Great. She was loved by her people simply as Queen Emma. This was her summer house, nestled in the hills of Oahu, and gracefully furnished with gifts from royalty the world over. Today, these chambers are serene, but they weren't always. This royal family was plagued by tragedy. Suspecting that his private secretary, an American named Nielsen, was carrying on with his queen, the king shot Nielsen at close range. Luckily, the king wasn't a good shot, and the rumor that had enraged him proved false. Here was the future of Hawaii's kingdom, Prince Albert, the only child and sole heir of Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma. But the little prince died at the age of 4. After the death of their son, the king and Queen Emma chose this site for a royal mausoleum. Before construction began, the king himself had died. The king's strong-willed brother Lot ascended the throne as Kamehameha V. Lot was a regal Hawaiian. He imposed a new constitution which returned broad powers to the crown, much to the dismay of resident Americans. This king never married. It is said he loved his brother's widow, Queen Emma. King Lot died in 1872 without an heir, the last of the Kamehamehas. Steamship travel had arrived. For the first time ever, sea travel was not dependent on the fickleness of weather. Ships coursed to Hawaii from America's west coast, from Australia, from New Zealand. There came more and more visitors, and more foreign laborers. Contract labor was being brought in from China and then Japan to work the cane fields because the Hawaiian labor pool was dwindling rapidly. They were dying out, these brave people, cast-offs of history. Their birth rate was plunging. Infections left so casually behind by whalers and sailors were taking their toll. From Europe, America came stowaway germs, cholera, measles, smallpox, to which Hawaiians had no immunities. In less than a century from Captain Cook's discovery to the election of Lunolito as the new king, the Hawaiian population plunged from 300,000 to 50,000. Every inch a king. This was the kingdom's second elected king, Kalakaua, descended from the fiercely independent chiefs of Kona. Though Hawaiian to the core, he created a royal court to vie with those of Europe. A crown was introduced, a scepter. He commanded the building of the present Iolani Palace. the only royal palace ever to stand on American soil. He built an ornate pavilion for coronations. Musician that he was, he commanded that the royal band play noonday concerts at the pavilion. It still does. He revived the hula, which had been banned by the puritanical New Englanders. This was a king who composed songs, wrote poetry, and played poker. The great Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson found Kalakaua to be intelligent with an astounding capacity for alcohol. Wherever he went in his island kingdom, he urged Hawaiians to increase the race. And he filled important posts in his government with Hawaiians, to the dismay of the American businessmen. Reformers rammed through a new constitution which reduced the king to a puppet. Worn, needing rest, in the 17th year of his reign, Kalakaua sailed to San Francisco. There he suffered a stroke and died. He is remembered warmly as the Merry Monarch. Now the forces of tragedy that seem always to have hovered over the Hawaiian royal house gain strength. Princess Liliuokalani, the king's sister, became queen and sovereign of the islands. This queen was Royal Ali'i, royal to the marrow, strong, stubborn, far-seeing. Despite her Victorian fineries, she was of the stuff that first sought these islands, of the strength of warriors and of the great chiefs, and her other shore was Hawaii for Hawaiians. But she was a feudal queen in an age of fledgling democracies. She was determined to restore full powers to the throne. Perhaps she should have reigned in a nobler age. But hers was an age of iron. Her beautiful islands had become a free-for-all for the industrial powers. And the fate of her 30,000 remaining pure Hawaiians was really in the hands of 30 men, most of them Americans. The monarchy was overthrown. From a provisional government, a Republic of Hawaii was created on July 4th, 1894. The next step would be annexation by the U.S. As for the Queen, she was kept here, under house arrest. She was a prisoner in her own palace. In her brief reign, Liliuokalani accomplished little of what she had set out to do. Yet she left a legacy treasured throughout the world. It is a song that she composed, for she was an accomplished musician, a gentle, somewhat sad song that has since become the anthem of these islands. Aloha Oi, aloha Oi, farewell to thee.
One fond embrace, until we meet again. Until we meet again.
They had been born, these islands, of a mating of fire and water, a fiery cauldron in a vastness of ocean. They had been settled, these islands, by voyagers from the Marquesas and from Tahiti. They had been welded into a kingdom, these stubborn islands, by a man whose daring in war was matched only by his wisdom in peace. This is Hawaii. Reaching from the past to our own century and centuries beyond. There is in Washington, D.C., a National Hall of Fame. Each of the United States has selected 2 of its most famous sons and daughters to represent it. The state of Virginia chose George Washington, the father of his country, and Robert E. Lee, that country's most beloved rebel. Humorist Will Rogers is here, a choice of the state of Oklahoma. And one of Colorado's choices is Dr. Florence Sabin, who'd advanced the cause of women. Hawaii's choices are Kamehameha the Great, who founded the royal line that steered his kingdom through the stormy 19th century. And Father Damien, a Belgian priest. Both were men of heroic proportions, yet utterly unalike. In the 1800s, diseases brought by outsiders, cholera, smallpox, even measles, drastically reduced the native population of Hawaii. Then in the 1860s came the greatest scourge of all, leprosy. Today it's called Hansen's disease, and there's a cure. But in the last half of the past century, human beings stood helpless against this most dreaded, disfiguring disease. The way in which the Hawaiian government dealt with the disease is echoed in the Old Testament. The leper shall cry, unclean. He is unclean. Out of the camp shall his dwelling be. Hawaiian lepers were hunted down by bloodhounds, torn from their families, and banished to the Kalupapa Peninsula on this island of Molokai. Turbulent seas and unscalable cliffs forming a prison made by nature. Yes, prison, for then leprosy was treated as a sinful crime. This place was called a colony. In truth, it was a chaos. The government failed to enforce order, and no one dared come close to the reeking, rotting, festering lepers. Not doctors, not clergy. Today on this peninsula, you can see proper graves. But in 1873, there were no decent burials. Graves were shallow, and wild pigs would hungrily snout up the dead. Since there was no cure, there was no hope, and no law. Then to these shores came a remarkable man, a Belgian of peasant stock named Joseph de Verster. Bred from faith and hard work, he is known to the world as Father Damien. Unlike other clergymen, Damien came and lived at the colony for the rest of his life. These are among his few possessions, tools with which he built sturdy houses for the lepers, houses that kept out the endless rain and chill wind. He cleaned sores. He dug proper graves for the dead. He created out of chaos a community. In spirit, he became one with the lepers, and he strove to make them realize that God loved them too, as he loves all his creation. Over these grounds, the lepers made their way to Damien's church. Processions of the living dead, some on toeless feet, some hiding their sores with flowers. One day, after many years of Sundays and holy days, Damien walked to the altar rail and addressed his congregation as "we lepers." He himself had contracted the disease. Now he was one with them, not only in spirit, but in body. For the next 4 years, he worked furiously to see that homes for the leper orphans would be completed. Then he took to his bed. Leprosy had ravaged his body from without. Now it attacked his throat, lungs, intestines. On the 15th of April, 1889, he died and was buried outside his lepers' church at the colony. Because of this one man, the attitude toward leprosy in the Western world changed from persecution to compassion. The spirit of this man, this saint as many call him, is still here on the wild shores of Molokai. As the whole Western world waltzed into the 20th century to the strains of the Belle Epoque, the balmy period of peace between the 1890s and the Great War, the stars and stripes were hoisted high over Hawaii, exactly at noon on the 12th of August, 1898. The islands had passed from being a kingdom to a republic. Now they were simply annexed as a U.S. territory. For the Royal Hawaiians, it was the saddest day in history. For the Anglo-Saxons, the most glorious. Business boomed. Steam power ruled the day. It offered infinite travel possibilities for the wealthy, even as far as romantic Honolulu, in the new star-spangled territory of Hawaii. There, though a minority, Haoles set the standards by which all of Hawaii's people were to live. Haoles, that's what Americans and British were called in Hawaiian. At one time, haole was applied to all foreigners. Now it was being narrowed down to Caucasians. Haole businessmen and sportsmen favored Hoffman's Chop House on Hotel Street. Haole ladies held teas in elegant gardens. And haole society attended openings at the Honolulu Opera House. What was natively Hawaiian was shameful, suppressed. Enterprising haoles were determined to turn the islands into a vacationer's paradise for the rich. In 1903, the Hawaii Promotion Committee was created to blow its own horn. It blew it well. The Moana Hotel was built at Waikiki. Honeymooners and health nuts were drawn to the accommodations, as was high society. They came to sun on the Waikiki sands. The more adventurous would take an inter-island steamer to the Big Island for an eye-smarting view of the volcanoes. Despite the frowns of Hawaii's haoles, tourists were fascinated by the hula. Celebrities discovered the islands. Novelist Jack London, silent film stars Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Swedish-born William Matson began launching luxury liners between San Francisco and Honolulu. By 1935, the Matson Navigation Company had a great fleet of 50 vessels. In 1926, Honolulu built its own city landmark, the 184-foot Aloha Tower. Then, with much fanfare, a wonderful pink palazzo was opened, the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Now even more celebrities of the day flocked to Waikiki. Spencer Tracy, Eddie Cantor, and swimmer Buster Crabbe. For most, a vacation in Hawaii was the trip of a lifetime. If one started in New York City, it could take close to a week by Pullman to the West Coast, and then another week or two by steamer to Honolulu. Then the Matson Line launched the luxurious Malolo, which made the crossing in 4.5 days. Now Pan American inaugurated Hawaii Clipper flights. The Clipper brought passengers from San Francisco to Honolulu in just 20 hours. Hawaii was indeed a paradise for a lucky few. But it was no paradise for lingering native Hawaiians, the few who remained. Their way of life was suppressed, their contributions ignored, except in one spectacular arena. That arena was the sea itself. In Hawaii, fast-moving waves swell, slap the coral reefs, then move toward shore with unleashed power. It became Hawaii's entry to the world of sports. Though the origins of surfing are lost, it was the ancient Hawaiians, men and women, who perfected surfing to an unparalleled degree, and Hawaiians who introduced it to the rest of the world. Today, surfers flock to Hawaii in pursuit of the perfect wave. At the beginning of the 20th century, Waikiki was a quiet beach, a palm-lined golden strand curving to Diamond Head. It had been a royal fishing ground. Now ragtail boys swam here and wanted never to get out of the water. When, in 1901, the Moana Hotel opened, it opened unto opportunities for these aquatic youngsters who, as bottom-of-the-heap Hawaiians, had little future. So they gave canoe rides, they taught surfing, they played the ukulele and sang beautifully. They took catchy nicknames: Scooter Boy, Tough Bill, Hawkshaw, Splash, Turkey Love, and Laughing John. Hawaii's Beach Boy era ran from the turn of the century to the late 50s. It wasn't a job, being a beach boy. It was a lifestyle. Maybe that's why the world insisted on referring to these grown men as boys. They played for a living. But there emerged a man who changed the world's perception of a beach boy, from something as frothy as sea foam to something as deep and noble as the sea itself. Duke Kahanamoku was born in 1890, a child of the sea. His family taught him that he had come from the sea, and to the sea they would return. Years of rough swimming and canoeing had turned him into a superb athlete. He had the long arms and powerful legs of a born swimmer. They said he had fins for feet. When he was clocked swimming the 100-yard freestyle faster than any human being in the world, he was entered in the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm. The crowd cheered as Duke received from the Swedish king his first Olympic gold medal. When he wasn't winning Olympic medals, Duke was on the beach. He'd say, "Out of the water, I'm nothing." He was acknowledged as the world's fastest swimmer, and foremost surfer. In 4 Olympic Games over 20 years, he had won 5 medals. Elected sheriff of Honolulu, he became Hawaii's unofficial ambassador. He even got the Queen Mother of the British royal family to dance the hula. Duke Kahanamoku was struck down by a heart attack at age 77. Hawaii mourned. A procession of canoes paddled out to sea. There, Duke's ashes were lowered into the water. Those closest to him were silent, remembering Duke's favorite saying, "Mahapi a'ale wala'au." Don't talk. Keep it in your heart. In the meantime, those original Hawaiians whose Polynesian forebears had found this other shore a paradise were sinking into the hell of extinction without a whimper. Haoles, a few Anglo-Saxons held the wealth of Hawaii in their manicured white hands and wielded power like a war club. Sugar was the hub of Hawaii's economy. Sugar production would rise to more than 1 million tons a year. The Haole sugar barons lived like barons indeed, especially Klaus Spreckels, titan of Hawaiian sugar. Best jobs on the plantations went to Haoles too. Americans, English, Scots were the overseers. As plantations grew, there was a pressing need for more and more field hands. Recruiters combed the world for cheap labor, docile labor. Workers with strong backs and no education. 10 to 12 hours a day for $20 to $30 a month. Between 1852 and 56, several thousand Chinese were shipped in as contract labor. Coolies, they were called. They were good workers, well behaved. The sugar barons liked that. But those Chinese were also smart and raring to get ahead. As soon as their labor contracts were fulfilled, those Chinese workers headed straight for Chinatown, Honolulu. There they'd open their own businesses. Soon they were opening their own banks and sending their sons to college on the mainland. The barons needed field hands, not college boys. So they netted whole families of poor Portuguese. Their women worked the fields as hard as the men, but the Portuguese wanted more money. They pulled in Puerto Ricans, boatloads of Koreans, and between 1907 and 1931, nearly 120,000 Filipinos. But, to the chagrin of the sugar barons, one of those Filipinos, Pablo Manlipit, put up a terrible fight for higher wages. For many of these immigrants, Hawaii became their other shore. To them, the cane fields were only a landing place. No immigrant group would exert more influence on the islands than the Japanese. They built temples and shrines and kept their Japanese language. They built tea houses. Since they married only their own kind, there was a lively commerce between Hawaii and Japan in mail-order brides. But in the 1920s, Japanese-language newspapers were urging their readers to concentrate on Hawaii, not Japan. And Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, were getting educations. McKinley High School in Honolulu was nicknamed Tokyo High. At the turn of the century, more than half of Hawaii's population was of Japanese origin. By 1930, they were running almost half the retail stores on the islands. They were increasingly successful, so they were resented, objects of suspicion, of distrust. This distrust was reinforced by events in Japan itself. The rising sun, burning higher and hotter over Asia. The military mode, the war with China, and the increasing tension between Japan and the United States. It was near the breaking point. America anticipated sabotage in Hawaii, not an attack. But an attack is what it got. Pearl Harbor, just outside Honolulu, was a colossal naval base for the U.S. Battleship Row. Between Ford Island and the Navy Yard lay America's invincible Pacific Fleet. There were 94 vessels in all, moored in a space not 3 miles square. Bomber and fighter planes at nearby airfields were lined up wingtip to wingtip to prevent the Japanese sabotage that the military was expecting. In reality, the planes were sitting ducks, in rows. December 7, the day that the Japanese Empire would strike like lightning. That early morning, at 06 hours, at a launching point in the North Central Pacific, Japanese warplanes were revving up for takeoffs from the decks of carriers. Thus was launched the greatest gamble in modern military history. Sunrise over Hawaii was 6:26 a.m. that Sunday morning. Most of the island's population was sleeping in and dreaming of a lazy Sunday. In the 1930s and early 40s, Americans contented themselves with the smug notion that Japanese manufactured goods were shoddy, fell apart. But there was nothing shoddy about the Nakajima 97 bombers, the Aichi dive bombers, and the deadly fighter planes called Zeros that were filling the airspace over Pearl Harbor that Sunday. Local time, 7:50 a.m. At the war cry, "Tora! Tiger! Tiger! Tiger!" the first wave swooped across the bay. Dive bombers screaming on Battleship Row. Never had a target been so naked to an enemy. Ear-splitting thunder. A deadly bomb strike on the battleship Arizona. With hundreds of men trapped below, the Arizona went down in 9 minutes. Battleship Row was mayhem. In an hour and 3/4, 18 ships of war had been sunk or wrecked. 159 planes were damaged, 188 destroyed. Total losses in human life, military and civilian: 2,409 killed, 1,178 wounded. Hawaii caught its breath. Martial law was declared, and it readied itself for an invasion. Tanks rumbled in front of Iolani Palace. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel became a Navy recreation center, and Fort Street, Honolulu, swarmed with soldiers and sailors. Now America wanted vengeance. It snarled in blind hatred at the Japanese. In California, where only 1% of the population was of Japanese origin, American-born citizens as well as old folks were given as little as 48 hours to get rid of their homes and farms and businesses. They were herded into camps where they lived as prisoners behind barbed wire. While mainland America was on its hate binge, Hawaii remained rational. At first, Hawaii's Japanese were blamed for Pearl Harbor. But no Hawaiian-Japanese, alien or American-born, was guilty of espionage or of the sabotage that Hawaii's top brass had prepared for. To the island's credit, Hawaiian-Japanese were loyal to the Stars and Stripes. The young Nisei were hot to get into the war, were hot to prove beyond a doubt the loyalty of Japanese Americans to the United States. A special military unit was created for Japanese American volunteers from Hawaii. The 100th Infantry Battalion, which joined mainland Japanese American GIs in forming the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. "Go for broke" was the battle cry of these eager warriors. They put their whole lives into the fray. For Uncle Sam, yes, and for their Japanese moms and pops and grandparents. Their casualty rate was 3 times higher than the average. Japanese Americans garnered 18,143 individual decorations for bravery, including a Congressional Medal of Honor. Hawaii's 100th alone earned the nickname the Purple Heart Battalion. The combat record of these men stands unequaled in U.S. military history. But as President Harry Truman said in honoring them, they had won the biggest battle of all, the battle against prejudice. They came back to these paradise islands, those Nisei survivors of Hawaii's 100th Battalion. They came back, those brave sons of coolie laborers who had sweated in the cane fields. Chinese, Korean, Puerto Rican, Portuguese, and Filipino. They came back, those heroic GIs who had sprung from tough New Englanders. And there were those wearing GI helmets whose ancestors had worn the feathered helmets of Hawaiian kings. They came back, having learned that there was much more to the world than the cane field and the taro patch. Many took advantage of the GI Bill of Rights to higher education, at schools and colleges, at Hawaii's university. Armed with diplomas, they battled for their place in the shaping of Hawaii's future. For 1,000 years, new immigrants had been peopling these islands. Tahitians came and imposed their gods on those Polynesians who had already settled here. Captain Cook's crew began melding Polynesian blood with British. Then came the Yankee strain from whalers, missionaries. And in the land grab decades of King Sugar, strains of Chinese and Japanese, Korean and Filipino from Asia, Puerto Ricans from the Caribbean, and Portuguese from Europe. Now each bloodline, Polynesian, Caucasian, Oriental, combine with the others to bring about the new Hawaiian. A unique breed of islander. A people of infinite variety and beauty. They have outgrown Chinatown and mail-order brides. The hands that dance the hula can also manage chopsticks, as well as three-finger poi. Honolulu's fine old churches, which are rooted in Europe and America, share community loyalties with Buddhist temples rooted in China, Korea, and Japan. The new Hawaiian. Racially, they encompass continents. And many can boast that coursing through their veins is that precious pint of pure Hawaiian blood. To all, Hawaii is home. On August 21st, 1959, the news reached Honolulu within minutes. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had declared Hawaii a fully fledged state of the American Union. Bells pealed, sirens shrieked, flags were flying, flags with a star for the new 50th state. The armed forces sponsored a display of fireworks, and one new Hawaiian of a hodgepodge of Polynesian and Oriental blood, summed it up when he said, "We are all Haoles now." The airship was replacing the cruise ship. Hawaii became affordable to masses of vacationers, a paradise for everyone. In 1967, for the first time in a one-year period, Hawaii played host to over 1 million tourists. They too were seeking an other shore, an escape from the mainland rat race, a breath of innocence. First-time visitors were amazed at the variety found in these islands, in sights, places, people. Like the voyagers of old, visitors came to these islands to return home to tell of the wonders of this new land. Touchdown at Honolulu, a 25-mile spread on the island of Oahu. Oahu means the gathering place, and it's aptly named. Though it ranks third in size among the islands, it holds more than 3/4 of Hawaii's population. Lovers of old Hawaii are pleased to learn that the Royal Hawaiian Band still plays in front of the Iolani Palace, a 100-year-old tradition. And that the palace has been restored to look as it did when it was a royal residence. For 75 years after royalty, it served as Hawaii's capital. Today, a splendid new capital rises out of a shimmering pool, as underwater islands might surface from the sea, and is topped by a volcano-shaped crown. The columns suggest royal palms. But it is the black and gold Kamehameha the Great that presides over the capital district. He is the Hawaiian David. Wai'aho still prevails, the Westminster Abbey of the Pacific. It began back in 1820 as a chapel of thatch. In time, Kamehameha III proposed a stone church. Thousands of Hawaiians worked 20 feet underwater, quarrying 1,400 slabs of coral, some weighing 1,000 pounds each, to build the new church. It was finished in 1842. This venerable old church has survived them all. Coronations of kings, the fall of the monarchy, World War II. Now Japanese tourists love to get married here. On the church ground stands the tomb of King Lunalilo, the only Hawaiian monarch who willed not to be laid to rest, here with his predecessors in the royal mausoleum. There are other graves of interest on Oahu, the burial plots of those zealous New England missionaries who built these houses and gave the Hawaiians the Bible, the alphabet, and the mumu. After the discovery of Hawaii itself, the coming of the missionaries in 1820 is the most important event in Hawaii's history. Chinatown is still thriving. Exotic foodstuffs, chow mein parlors, noodle factories, purveyors of herbal medicine. Today, the district is a first step for new immigrants, such as the Vietnamese. Not many Hawaiian Chinese reside in Chinatown anymore, but historic Chinatown remains their focal point. It had survived 2 disastrous fires. And now all Oahu heads for Chinatown on Chinese New Year's. Since statehood, Waikiki is bustling as never before. To many, this is Hawaii. It hosts half the state's accommodations. The array of faces on the beach attest to the international character of tourism here. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel is still here, still cushioned by tropical gardens and a golden beach. A pink princess lost in a forest of high-rises. In Waikiki, fun is in the air. The trip to Honolulu's Bishop Museum satisfies a visitor's hunger for first-hand knowledge of the pure Hawaiians. Indeed, all Polynesian peoples. Here is housed the world's largest collection of Hawaiiana. The museum itself is a memorial to Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop, the great-granddaughter of Kamehameha the First. First-time visitors were soon to learn that there was much more to Oahu than Honolulu and its beach at Waikiki. 15 miles east is Sea Life Park. Here, 4,000 sea specimens, fish, crustaceans, sea turtles, live together in a 300,000-gallon aquarium. And there are shows starring dolphins, penguins, sea lions, and whales. At sparkling Hanauma Bay, lined with palms, one can get into the swim oneself. This is a state park, an underwater state park. One can scuba dive or snorkel about the reefs. Hanauma was the location of Blue Hawaii, the first of 3 films that Elvis Presley made in the Hawaiian Islands. Presley loved Hawaii, returning again and again to his island hideaways. The Elvis Hawaii films clicked off a romance between show business and the islands, spawning such offspring as Hawaii Five-0. In windward Oahu, visitors brave chilly gusts for turns on the Nu'uanu Pale lookout. It offers a breathtaking view. It was to here, the Nu'uanu Pale, that Kamehameha the Great drove Oahu's defenders. Many jumped or were pushed to their deaths. The island's north shore is famous for its surf. On the north side of the Waimea River is rain-soaked Waimea Falls Park and Botanical Gardens. Cliff divers plunge into the handsome pool at the base of the falls. Dancers perform hulas of many kinds. In the recreation of an early Hawaiian village, Hawaiians relive their early history. A glimpse of Hawaii's past, Oahu's most authentic cultural celebration. The other big cultural performance is at the nearby Polynesian village in which the folkways of the people of the Pacific Rim, Tongans, Samoans, Tahitians, are relived. These young performers are students at Hawaii's Brigham Young University. On Oahu, Pearl Harbor draws its share of visitors. No one leaves unmoved. The Pearl Harbor Monument was built to commemorate the 1941 attack. A concrete bridge spans the USS Arizona, one of the vessels that was sunk. Oil still seeps from the ship's belly. Its hull is a tomb for the 1,102 men who were trapped on it when it sank. A fifth of all visitors to this monument are from Japan. Today, Americans and Japanese together pay respect. a broad expanse of green, with graves marked by simple white tablets. 28,000 of them. This is Oahu's famous Punch Bowl, the national cemetery of the Pacific. But the most beloved hero buried here wasn't a soldier in World War II. He's the war correspondent Ernie Pyle. Again and again, Pyle had risked his life so that the readers back home would know just what their boys were going through. He fell by machine gun fire near Okinawa. Many of the Nisei, Japanese Americans who went for broke in the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd, the most decorated units in American military history, lie here. In the old days, small ships made regular sailings between the islands. We'd find them slow. Today, air transport makes those connections with long timetables of frequent flights, for visitors as well as residents. 100 miles west of Oahu lies Kauai. Flight time from Honolulu is just 30 minutes. Kauai is the leftover of an ancient volcano and the oldest of the main islands. It holds a special place in Hawaii's history. Hawaiian myth says Pele first lived on this island, and it was here that the Menehune built their ditches and fish ponds. Kauai was the first stop on Captain Cook's famous first voyage to Hawaii. He crossed the bar at Waimea on the west shore. He reprovisioned from the island's rich agricultural bounty. Today, native Hawaiians from the neighboring island of Niihau come to market on Kauai. It's called the Garden Isle. Sugarcane first succeeded in Kauai's rich lava soil. It's still grown extensively. And there are bumper crops of taro. But much of the island is wonderfully wild. Wet and verdant, Hanalei's taro patches are a wildlife refuge. Shelter to the threatened Hawaiian stilt. Another wildlife refuge skirts the Kilauea Lighthouse. Tropic birds swirl in the air currents. Visitors boat on the Waialui River to the Fern Grotto, a cool, damp cavern lushly clothed in ferns. Some couples choose it as a place with its feeling of a chapel built by nature to solemnize their weddings. This beach, framed by black lava rock, was featured in the movie musical South Pacific. From the center of the island rises Mount Waialeale, often shrouded in clouds and fog. It's rarely visible. With an annual rainfall approaching 500 inches, this is the wettest spot on Earth. In a gully between the mountains oozes Alakai Swamp. Thickets of ferns, rare plants, the bright red ohia blossom. Here remain a few of Hawaii's rare birds, whose feathers were prized for capes of kings. Southeast of the swamp, rafting explorations coast the secrets of Napali Cliffs. This might very well be the most rugged, most beautiful coastline on Earth. Inland, there is a sight that amazes the first-time visitor. A canyon. For all the world, it looks like a little brother to the Grand Canyon. This is Kauai's own Waimea Canyon, a gorge almost 3,000 feet deep, cut into the Koki Plateau. The reds and ochres of volcanic walls are offset by mossy greens and blues. There is more scenic variety on this little island than in whole regions of the American mainland. A bird's-eye view of the island by helicopter is spectacular. "100 miles southeast of Oahu, Maui. Maui is the Valley Isle, the state's second largest island. Once Maui was two islands, which are joined now by an isthmus created by erosion. It was here, in the beautiful Iao Valley, that the bloodiest of battles was fought when Kamehameha the Great reached beyond his own territorial island of Hawaii to conquer Maui. In taking Maui, Kamehameha was aided by an American cannoneer. Today, sugarcane is king. This train carries not sugarcane, but people. To Lahaina Station. Lahaina is legendary. Whaling town, pleasure port for seamen. A small stretch of precious town frontage preserves Lahaina of the mid-1800s, when thousands of whalers anchored their ships offshore. This is the old jail where rowdy whalers of that time were constrained. In this cemetery, Melville's cousin is buried. But most of Front Street is lined with souvenir shops and t-shirt outlets. Shopping malls, bistros, and bars have mushroomed all over Lahaina. The spirit of old Lahaina is found in this replica of a 19th century brig, the Carthaginian. Its cargo is an exhibit on the world of the whale. Whale watching is a long-running event in Lahaina. After summering in Alaska, humpback whales return to these waters to breed and give birth to their young. They arrive in early December. So do the whale watchers. On the other side of Maui, the 7 pools of Kipalulu, near Hana, were special to the Hawaiian people. A series of cascading waterfalls and fern-lined pools. The Hana area is a holdover of old Hawaii. Taro patches, banana groves. Queen Ka'ahumanu, Kamehameha the Great's favorite wife, was born here. Even today, most of its residents are part Hawaiian. From Hana, sailing canoes skirt the rugged coast. Paddling hard and powered by the wind, fiberglass descendants of the ancient wooden outriggers follow traditional sea paths. Racing the boat is hard work, exhilarating. These fast boats brave even the roughest seas. Outrigger canoe sailing keeps alive the tradition of the ancient Hawaiians. This same side of the island boasts Haleakala National Park. Among other things, this vast area is a refuge for plants and birds native only to these islands. The rare silver sword, the nene, land-loving goose and the state bird of Hawaii. But the sight that sears itself upon human memory is the Haleakala crater. Visitors begin arriving before dawn, anticipating the moment. They are 10,000 feet above sea level. The air is thin, frosty. Then a shimmering sun rises, as though from the beginning of time. The world is seen anew. Now the visitor can fully understand the meaning of the word Haleakala, dwelling of the sun. There is a legend that a mischievous demagogue named Maui came to this crater's rim and lassoed the sun's rays, making captive the life-giving orb. He released the sun only after obtaining a promise that the sun would travel more slowly across the heavens, thus shedding more daylight on the earth. This dark crater, a thing of beauty in its bleakness, slopes to a depth of 3,000 feet. It reaches 7.5 miles in length. Crusty volcanic cones of vivid hues, the sculpting of 1,000,000 years of erosion. The eerie silence of this great primordial maw. Molokai is 50 miles east of Oahu. It's the 5th largest of the islands and shaped like a shoe. People call it the Friendly Isle. Molokai is old Hawaii. Down home Hawaii. Crowing roosters are a visitor's wake-up call on this island. Molokai is pleasant, sleepy. People speak Hawaiian on the streets.
They are so wonderful. Faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest of this is charity. Yes, the Lord gives us.
Of the row of churches fronting the Royal Coconut Grove, several still hold services in the Hawaiian language. This island has more full-blooded Hawaiians than any other but Niihau. There are sandalwood pits on this island. During the last century, foreign traders destroyed whole forests of fragrant Hawaiian sandalwood. These pits, dug to simulate a boat, were used to measure the precious wood. Yet here, in sparsely populated Molokai, there are still stands of sandalwood and forests rich in the plants and trees native to these islands. Some of Hawaii's most spectacular scenery is found on Molokai. This is the Pali Coast, with its soaring green cliffs and plunging waterfalls. No roads lead to the leper colony, but determined visitors arrive by airplane, by mule, even by foot. There are many monuments to Father Damien here. The few victims of Hansen's disease remaining in the colony live in Kalapapa. They're free to leave, but prefer to live here in their cottages, with their gardens and TVs. This is home. Their privacy is protected, and it is against the law to photograph them. Lanai, 70 miles from Oahu, is sixth in size of the 8 main islands. Lanai is an extinct single-crater volcano. It's 17 miles long and 13 miles wide. Ghosts kept the island of Lanai from early settlement. At least that's the legend. Lanai was haunted. Only ghosts lived here. Evil spirits. So the early Hawaiians shunned it. But roll away the legend, and one finds an exquisite island of pristine and deserted beaches. Pineapple became a ghost breaker. In the 19th century, enterprising haoles turned Lanai into the world's largest pineapple plantation. For many years, these islands produced 90% of America's pineapples, with Lanai in the lead. The pineapple was brought to the islands during the first Kamehameha's reign by a Spanish Johnny Appleseed named Francisco de Paulo y Marin. Today, only a few pineapple fields are still being cultivated. And Lanai's ghosts are friendlier now. But perhaps that spooky old legend keeps this mini paradise off the popular tourist treks. Keeps the resorts few and expensive, helping to preserve the untouched loveliness of this island. Sometimes it's called the Orchid Island, or the Volcano Island. 200 miles southeast of Oahu, the island of Hawaii is the youngest of the Hawaiian chain. Since it is nearly twice the size of all the other islands combined, it is rightfully called the Big Island. It is also big in contrasts. It produces the only commercially grown coffee in the United States, Kona coffee. At the same time, it provides the islands with most of their Christmas trees. It boasts beautiful beaches of black sand, tropical fern forests, and skiing on the lava slopes of Mauna Kea Peak. While hulas are being danced at Hotel Luau's, Hawaiian cowboys might be rounding up cattle on Parker Ranch, which is huge, 3/4 the size of the island of Oahu. Cattle ranches have a big stake in Hawaii's history, hence Hawaiian cowboys called paniolo's. More than a century and a half ago, 3 Spanish-Mexican vaqueros were brought in from California to punch cattle. Paniolo's is the way Espanoles came to be pronounced in the islands. Kailua Kona on the Kona coast is becoming the island's tourist hub. The King Kamehameha Hotel offers a lively luau with pig barbecued in a pit, Polynesian style. On the hotel grounds, an authentically restored heiau, one of Kamehameha the Great's favorites. He died here in 1819. His bones were hidden to protect his mana. Nearby, also on the shores of Kailua, is Hulihi Palace. This charming museum preserves a glimpse of Hawaiian royalty. The Kona coast has some of the best deep-sea fishing in the islands. World record catches of Pacific blue marlin, mahi-mahi, and tuna. Without our manufactured gear, the old Hawaiians were skilled fishermen. They fished with hooks made of bone, turtle shell, and sometimes whale ivory. They spearfished. They used nets some 250 feet long. Now, the sport of windsurfing is catching on, a marriage of surfboard to sail. Though Hilo is the largest city on the island and the fourth largest in the state, it feels down home. It's a sugarcane town grown big. It spreads along the edge of Hilo Bay and up into the hills overlooking the water. Yet once a year, this folksy town explodes with the Merry Monarch Festival, and Hawaiians from all over the islands hie to Hilo. Hula groups vie for the honor of performing in memory of King Kalakaua, the Merry Monarch. The ancient hula, mistaken by 19th century missionaries as a nasty form of dancing, had been stashed away with other misunderstood arts of the Hawaiian people. It was Kalakaua who rescued this noble dance form from its cultural mothballs, if not from its tomb. Now it's being celebrated anew. The ancient hula, kahiku, which had almost been done in by censorship and suppression. The modern hula, awana, derived from the ancient hulas. The Merry Monarch was a fine musician. He ennobled a small Portuguese instrument known as the ukulele, now much associated with Hawaii. It was his sister, Queen Nili Okolani, who composed Aloha Oe. It's become the anthem of these islands. Hawaiian music continues to change and grow, like the landscape. The fiery heart of this astounding island is Volcanoes National Park. This island is the fastest growing and most volcanic outcrop of land on the face of the earth. Volcano House, a venerable hotel styled as a sprawling hunting lodge, is inside the park. It offers a rimside view of Kilauea Crater. The legendary Pele, goddess of Hawaii's volcanoes, makes her home in Kilauea's fire pit. Two active volcanoes dominate the park, and Kilauea is the collapsed summit of one of them. There is a belief in Pele on the part of many Hawaiians. If not a belief, a healthy respect for what she stands for. Once on a fire binge, Pele destroys anything in her path. Forests, highways, spanking new subdivisions. In 1880, Pele was on an eruption rampage. The town of Hilo lay innocently in the path of her lava flow. The old Hawaiians begged 63-year-old Princess Ruth, the 400-pound granddaughter of Kamehameha the Great, to save the city. Ruth didn't hesitate. She transported her tremendous bulk with all due speed to the rim of Kilauea Caldera. There she offered Pele a bottle of good brandy, for which the goddess has a weakness. Pele was appeased. Hilo was saved. the lava flow halted at the town's door. The first haoles to come to these islands were greeted in a spirit of welcome, of warmth, of loving, called in Hawaiian, aloha. As Hawaiians learned new ways, their old ways were suppressed. Their dance, their music, their way of life. They were taught that what was Hawaiian was shameful. Hawaiiana was brought out only for tourists. What had once been sacred rituals became show routines. Today, after 200 years of decline, there is a revival of authentic Hawaiian culture. A renaissance. Now, Hawaiians take as much pride in the day honoring King Kamehameha as they do the 4th of July. And revel in the joys of the Merry Monarch Festival. The values of the old rural lifestyle are being renewed. Ancient crafts revived. Racing outriggers, canoes first designed by the ancients, is today's sport of choice. Artists are probing the Hawaiian spirit to inspire and delight in contemporary painting. The hula has been restored to its nobility as a dance expressing the mythic origins of a people. There is a new respect for folk medicines and for the ways of the kahunas, the Hawaiian priests of old. Again, the Hawaiian language is being taught to the young. Demands are being made to correct the injustices of the past. One is proud to be Hawaiian again. There is among Hawaiians a revived spirit of graciousness and love and warmth. The spirit of aloha. May it thrive.